Welcome to Psych 310, Abnormal Psychology. I'm Dr. Sam Fiala. I'll be your instructor for this online course. I'm an assistant professor at A&M Central Texas University and also a licensed psychologist in the state of Texas. In addition to teaching, I also do a little bit of private practice work just to kind of keep my hand in the clinical world, working with early childhood intervention, working with kids and families where the children age 0 to 3 have a developmental delay or disability or are at risk for developmental delay or disability. So that's just a quick little bit about me. Let's get on to talking about the course, and then we'll go on to talk about defining. So first, I'm going to talk about some things with the syllabus. So if you don't have your syllabus out in front of you, go ahead and pause the video and grab it, or pull it up on another screen, split screen, whatever you need to do. Okay, the course objectives, an overview, the first thing you see on the syllabus. And if I were to summarize the course objectives, it would be, I want you to think critically about abnormal behavior. There are plenty of people out there who are ready, willing, and eager to give you their opinion about what behavior is abnormal, what's not abnormal, what behavior is pathological, and what isn't pathological. But even the experts' opinions are opinions. And unless you are well armed with knowledge, all you can do is kind of nod and go, yeah, I guess that must be right. That's what they say. But if you study and you think critically, then you can question these things and decide for yourself whether or not you agree with what people are saying about behavior. And there are some pretty important reasons to pay attention to these things, because the labels that get applied related to abnormal behavior are powerful if they're going to be applied to you or to your child or someone you love. There is an impact. So it's important to know what these things mean, so I think this course is important for not just people who want to go into the mental health field, but for anybody who wants to be a responsible citizen. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox. This is a fully online course. Most of the instruction I'll deliver will be like this, with these kind of PowerPoint videos that I've narrated. And a little bit through the discussion boards and postings, and then also the only kind of back and forth we'll really get is with whenever you have questions and you email them to me, other than one assignment I'll talk about in a minute. But please feel free to email me with questions, not just about, hey, I missed number 2 on the quiz, why? But if you just have a question about the chapter, or about the disorders or the behaviors we're studying at that point in time, email me, and I'll be glad to talk about that with you. And if you want to, I'll get back to a minute. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. The textbook is Durand and Barlow's 6th edition. Some students last semester used the 5th edition, and they said they didn't feel like there were kind of any kind of quiz questions or test questions that came out of nowhere, and they didn't know what it was. So if you have the 5th edition, you may be okay. I can't guarantee it because I haven't taken the course with the 5th edition. But 2 other people have vouched for that. It was fine. If you don't have a book yet, get one now. It's a very short course. It moves very quickly. If you can't get a paper copy, get the online version. Sometimes they're cheaper than the paper ones anyway. So no reason not to have a book now. Okay, so what I was getting at you earlier, contact me. Like I said, feel free to email me. The best way to email me is in Blackboard. I think the tab is called Messages now. And then, but if you want to talk, email me. We can set up time to talk on the phone, or we can set up a chat session on Blackboard, or we can set up time to meet face to face if you'd like in my office in Killeen. Just let me know. Participation. This isn't a self-paced course. There are lots of deadlines, and that's because there's so much information. If I don't kind of impose this structure with deadlines and late penalties, there's no way you can kind of get it all in the limited time we have. And also, there are some kind of somewhat interactive components, and so there is some participation required. And anytime you're going to learn something, truly learn it, it's going to require you doing more work than me, the instructor, right? You're the one that has to go out and kind of form questions in your mind about the material you're consuming for it to have any kind of meaning to you, to kind of create these meaningful semantic networks, right? So if you care at all about this material, participate fully. Don't just go through the motions, because if you do, yeah, you'll get a grade. Yeah, you may even get a good grade. But if you don't learn anything, what's the point of going to college? All right. The assignments. The first one is one where we get a little bit of interaction. It's a real simple thing, just the "Hey, what about" discussion postings, where here in the next couple of days, think about 2 questions you have about abnormal behavior, about kind of clinical psychology, psychopathology, just things you've kind of wondered, and post them. And I won't reply right away, but what I'll do is, after I've gotten everybody's questions, which do not too far from now, whatever I don't know the answer to off the top of my head, I'll research. And then I'll record some lecture videos that I'll post at the end of the semester, where I'll address all these questions. And some of the questions, I think you may find, you ask the question now, and then over the course of the semester, as you're doing the reading, watching the videos, and thinking about stuff, you'll figure out the answer yourself before you ever see my video at the end. Okay? But it's all you got to do to get the points for that is get 2 questions that are relevant and don't make a lot of spelling errors. Another discussion posting assignment is the mental illness in the media assignment. We've got 9 of the chapters that we read are about groups of disorders, right? So the first couple are often about kind of history of abnormal behavior and studying it and etiology, those types of things. And the rest are about groups of disorders. But this chapter's on anxiety disorders. This chapter's on mood disorders. So for each of those, you have the opportunity to make a posting about mental illness in the media. And for this, all you have to do is think of some character in the media. It can be TV, movie, books, comic books, the internet, some sort of person that is an internet presence, whatever, that you think might meet criteria for one of the disorders in that particular chapter. So there's like chapter 4 discussion postings. There's a thread for that. There's a separate thread for chapter 5, chapter 6, so on and so forth. So chapter 4, anxiety disorders. If you think of somebody in the media, a TV character, personality, whatever, who, hey, they might have an anxiety disorder, post that. Say, hey, I think so-and-so has this anxiety disorder, and here's why. You don't have to go a long paragraph or essay about it. Just 1 or 2 sentences about why you think they might have that particular anxiety disorder. And so you can get credit for doing that. Or if you go to post, and, oh, somebody took mine, you can still use that same one if you add to it. So if you say, oh yeah, I agree, and here's another reason or 2, preferably 2, why that diagnosis fits this person. Or you could also say, oh no, I think that person has a diagnosis, but it's not that one, and here's why. Or I don't think that person meets criteria at all, and here's why. So as long as you can elaborate on why you think what you think, you don't have to come up with an original one. You can just reply to somebody else's. But you can do either one of those 2. And you don't have to do it for all of the 9 chapters that talk about disorders. You pick 5 of them. Right, so on the grade book, you may show up some zeros. Right, you should have 4 zeros and then 5 threes, because it's worth 15 points total. 3 points for each one. So you'd have 5 by the end. You should have 5 threes and 4 zeros, because you're not going to answer all of them. Just pick 5 of the 9 chapters, any ones you want that you can think of good examples for. Right. Okay, so that's that. The Ask the Therapist assignment is one we're trying to encourage you to get into kind of the science behind what we do. So I've posted 2 letters, kind of Dear Abby type letters, where they're writing to you as the expert, asking you for advice about some problem, right? And I want you to write them back for this assignment, but not with your opinion or anybody else's opinions, but hey, here's what I think based on this research. So go and find a couple of articles and related to the topic they're asking about, find out what the research says, and then tell them, hey, you're worried about this, but this is what's going on. Or yeah, you should be worried because people, these researchers found this. Oh, and these researchers found this. Right. So finding empirical articles that summarize studies that people did, not just some experts talking about their opinions. I don't want any of that stuff. I want facts, research findings that you're reporting back to this person. Okay. And you want to be sure and give credit appropriately by appropriately citing your sources. If you're not sure how to do that, I think the library has done some workshops with APA stuff. I'll see if I can get my hands on those materials and make those available to you for anybody who's not familiar with APA style for citing sources. Okay, then the last assignment is the diagnostic assessment assignment. In this one, I'll give you 3 brief scenarios, each describing an individual who's exhibiting some behavior or behaviors that may be abnormal. And I haven't put these scenarios up yet because I haven't written them yet. But you're going to pick one of the 3. You don't have to do all of them. You pick one, and you're going to create an interview transcript where you imagine this interview you would have with this fictitious person. So you're going to ask the questions, and you're going to provide the answers from this fictitious person. And it's going to be interviewed to determine if their behavior is pathological or not. So it seems a little abnormal, but is it pathological? Does it meet criteria for a psychiatric diagnosis? And if so, which diagnosis? Right? So you have these questions and responses, and then at the end you'll say you have your decisions. Yes, it's pathological. No, it's not. And if yes, what disorder or disorders they meet criteria for? And if not, what disorders you ruled out? So none of these behaviors meet criteria for psychological disorder, but I decided it wasn't this. So you might think it was major depressive disorder, but it's not. Right? So I just want to make sure that you're thinking in the right area diagnostically, even if your answers showed that the person didn't really meet criteria. Okay. And I've got a rubric posted for that. For all these, there's rubrics posted, and for that one, I think there's a snippet of a transcript where I give you a little bit of an example of what I'm looking for. And for, I think, all of these assignments, there's a part of your grade will be, when you look at the rubrics, is based on writing mechanics. So spelling errors, capitalization, grammar. And you think, why is he grading us on that? Because it's important. Right. And I'm not your English teacher, but communicating clearly in your when you speak and when you write is super important, even in simple things like emails, because people judge you based on your language. They judge your level of intelligence. So even if you're the smartest person in the world, if you make silly punctuation errors, people are going to underestimate your intelligence. That could put you at a disadvantage. So I want to get you to think about, even when doing little things like little dinky discussion posting things, pay attention to your spelling and your grammar and your capitalization and all those rules, because it is important how you come across. Okay, we'll have quizzes over each chapter and also over the syllabus. Pretty straightforward. They're timed. You have an hour to do them. Once you start, you need to go ahead and finish. You can't stop midway through and come back to it. It's based over the reading and the lecture videos. Most of them count some combination, so read and watch the videos before you try to take them. You see one question at a time. No big deal. Final exam is comprehensive at the end of the semester. Mixture of multiple choice and essay. We'll talk more about it when we get closer to that point in time. But the main thing to keep in mind is that it's not going to be straight memorization, obviously, because it's an online course, so you don't have to memorize. You could just turn the page. So it's going to require you to apply your knowledge. So I may describe some case and say, what diagnosis does this look like? Right? And you're not going to be able to look that up. It's not going to say in the book, oh, if they have this, this, and this, here's the diagnosis. You're going to have to understand what those behaviors mean and how they relate to the symptoms we've read about in terms of disorders, things like that. Other stuff in the syllabus, technological requirements. Obviously, if you're viewing this, you probably have mastered most of the technological difficulties related to using Blackboard. But one note I think I put in the syllabus, just to kind of reiterate, is when you're taking quizzes, and especially the final exam, use a hardwired computer. Don't use a laptop over Ethernet, or for gosh sakes, don't use your smartphone. I don't even think you can, but if you hacked it and can now, don't do that. Best thing to do actually is probably go to the lab and up on one of the campus when taking the final exam. That way, there's a techie there where if something goes wrong, they can help you and they can vouch for you that it's not your fault that the computer screwed up. Right? For tech support, we have people in the labs. Blackboard itself has its own support portal, which is pretty good, and we're paying money for it, so might as well use it. Well, you're paying money for it. It's probably coming out of your student fees. So make use of it. Academic integrity is important, and this is about doing your own work. Right, so not submitting a paper for this class that you've done for some other class. It's about appropriately citing sources when writing papers and things like the Ask a Therapist assignment. And I do take that quite seriously, and hopefully you do as well, because the value of your degree is based largely on our shared sense of academic integrity. In terms of support services, for any of you who may have learning disability, if you need accommodations, get with Ryan Thompson, the academic support programs coordinator, and get the paperwork done, whatever he wants you to have done. Get it to me, and I'm more than willing to make whatever accommodations you need to be successful. If it's larger print on the assignments, longer time in examinations, whatever. I just have to have that documentation to be able to do that. Grading, I've got that laid out. Hopefully it's pretty straightforward, what things are worth and how, and the rubrics are all going to be are online. One note about grading: don't trust Blackboard to calculate your points, because Blackboard, I think, gives you like total points so far, total points possible, but that will be misleading because of the way the assignments are done. Like with the mental illness and the media assignment, you're going to have a couple of zeros. So Blackboard's going to think you should have more points than you really do have. So calculate your grade yourself by hand. Don't rely on those totals. The late work policy, if you turn something in late, 1 to 2 days, just take off 10%. More than that, we go 3 to 7 days. Now we're looking at 20%. After a week, we're looking at 50%. But it doesn't ever go to 100% until the last day of class, July 27th. If you turn it in before then, you still get some points. Turn it in. I think students often think, oh, it's late and there's no point in doing it. Yes, there's a point. The difference between passing and failing is usually turning it in. When people have failed this course, it's not because they've done really poorly on the assignments, it's because they didn't turn stuff in. So even if you're going to turn it in late, turn it in. I'd rather you turn it on time, but even if you can't do that, turn it in, turn it in, turn it in. Okay. Course calendar on the back more than likely has errors. I almost always screw something up on there, so if you come across where a date doesn't match a day of the week, let me know. Or something looks screwy, let me know, and I'll fix it and send out the revised calendar. But it looks right so far to me, but I always miss something. So let me know when you find what it is this time. Hopefully it's pretty clear how it's laid out. I've got the dates there when the videos will be available, and most of them will be available before those dates, but by those dates they'll be up. Same for the quizzes will be up before they're due. They're posted on the days they're due. So like the syllabus quiz is on 6-8 Friday, so the syllabus quiz is due on Friday, June 8th at 11:59 p.m. and everything is due on the date posted at just before midnight. Okay, I think that's it for the syllabus. Now let's talk about defining abnormal behavior and also defining normal behavior. Okay, first I want you to try to think of examples. When you hear the term abnormal behavior, what do you think of? What is something that you would consider abnormal behavior? Okay, now that you've kind of thought about a couple of things, I'll just kind of tell you again the definition from your textbook of what constitutes abnormal behavior. According to Duran and Barlow, it's actions that are unexpected and often evaluated negatively because they differ from typical or usual behavior. Right, so unexpected, negatively evaluated, and atypical. Okay. So thinking about that definition, are the things you thought of in your examples, do they meet that those criteria? Are they actions? Were they things that are unexpected? Do you kind of see them negatively? And are they different than what typical behavior is? Okay. Now I want you to think about, okay, so that definition, what does it mean? Let's take it piece by piece. It talks about their actions that are unexpected. Well, who sets the expectations? Unexpected by who? You know, if a woman decides to work full-time rather than to stay home and raise children, is this abnormal behavior? You know, I mean, this may violate expectations of some people. So this question hopefully points out to you that context is supremely important in defining abnormal behavior. Right? What's abnormal to me may not be abnormal to you, and that's a hugely important concept for this entire course. Right? The importance of context in defining abnormal behavior. And then the other thing was, the second part of this thing was, it's often negatively evaluated. Why? Why is the evaluation negative? Probably because of the first part, the unexpected, right? Behaviors that are unexpected make people seem unpredictable, maybe even mysterious, and this makes us uncomfortable, right? We don't like not knowing what somebody's going to do or why they're doing what they're doing, right? Because if we don't know what they're doing or why they're doing it, they might do something that hurts us, hurt somebody we love, or embarrass us. Right? We like predictability, and people vary with how much they need predictability. Right? It's an individual difference, but by and large, most people prefer some level of predictability and are uncomfortable with certain levels of unpredictability, and that's probably a big reason why there's that kind of negative evaluative component. And the last part was differs from typical behavior. Well, hopefully the question that pops in your head at this point is, well, what's typical behavior? You know, what's normal? Well, it's what most people do. Well, how many people is most people? I don't know. That's a good question. And beyond that, how far from typical can you get and still be normal? So, if you think about, when you're walking down the street, if you're not facing forwards, but instead you're facing backwards or even facing sideways, that's kind of abnormal, right? You deviated from a norm, a pretty clear norm, and most people say, oh, that's abnormal. Now, if somebody asks, well, what kind of toothpaste do you use? What's the normal answer? What's the typical answer? I don't know, Crest, Colgate? I don't know. So, the point of this is that typical behavior, again, there's some context here. Some norms are more well-defined than others, right? For some behaviors, we have clear expectations, and there's a clear understanding, shared understanding of what constitutes typical behavior. And then for other behaviors, you have more latitude for deviating from the norm. Okay. So, even understanding abnormal behavior, which may seem pretty clear, oh yeah, I know what it is if I see it, maybe it's not so clear. It's maybe a little harder to track down than you maybe first assumed. Well, the other thing that we talk about that isn't the same thing as abnormal behavior, but is related, would be psychological disorders. And what I'm going to present here is the definition of a psychological disorder that's included in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 4th edition text revision, written by the American Psychiatric Association. So, a A psychological disorder is a behavioral or psychological syndrome or pattern. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, compared to the definition of abnormal behavior, where it was actions, well, this is a behavioral psychological syndrome or pattern. So when we have something like psychological pattern, then that tells us, well, it can be more than just actions, right? It can be, because psychological has to do with actions or behaviors, thoughts, and feelings. So thoughts, behaviors, feelings, and some syndrome of those things, or some pattern. So not just one thing. So one single behavior, one single thought, not sufficient to constitute a psychological disorder. Now let's consider for a second a hypothetical disorder, one that doesn't currently exist in the DSM, to help us think about this definition a bit further. Something that I've called teenager syndrome. So teenager syndrome, it could meet the definition of psychological disorder, because I can think of multiple behaviors, thoughts, and feelings that they're a syndrome, they're a pattern, they occur in more than one individual, right? So this kind of repetitive nature. I see the same constellation of behaviors associated with this syndrome. Some examples include spends excessive amounts of time engaged in nonverbal communication while ignoring important external stimuli. That would be when they're texting when you're trying to tell them it's time for dinner. There might be kind of a cognition, overly concerned with how they are perceived by others. Okay? And then kind of affectively, it's common to see pronounced mood reactivity, such that they can seem happy and fine, and you say the wrong thing, and suddenly they're very angry. They react strongly with their emotions to stimuli. Okay. So I've got all these different thoughts, feelings, behaviors. It happens in more than one individual, such that I see that it's a pattern. Okay, so maybe this is a disorder. Okay. The next component to the definition, so it's this pattern of behaviors, thoughts, feelings that's clinically significant. And this is a seemingly innocuous phrase, right? Well, yeah, okay, that sounds good, clinically significant. But this is a very important little piece of the definition. What clinically significant means is that some clinician decides if it's significant. Some clinician decides if it's a disorder. Right? This is the part of the definition that gives some people the power to label other people. Right? If you think your mother-in-law is narcissistic, you can't say, oh, well, she has narcissistic personality disorder. Well, I mean, you could say that, but it wouldn't really mean anything. Now, if you were a licensed mental health care provider treating her, which would be unethical for some other reasons, and you said that, then that would have some impact, right? That would be part of her medical record and would have an impact on certain things. So clinically significant is an important part of this definition. Some people are empowered to make the decision of whether or not, given all the other aspects of the definition, okay, given all this stuff, based on my expertise, does this person meet criteria or not? Okay. Another big piece. It's a manifestation of a behavioral, biological, or psychological dysfunction. And it probably could just put manifestation of a psychological dysfunction, but to keep the different camps happy who argue about whether we should just focus on behavior or we should just focus on biology, you put everything in there together. But this basically is saying that something is not functioning the way it should. Right? And again, notice there's an assumption inherent here that there is a correct way to be or for things to function. Right, so with our teenager syndrome, one thing you may see is friends suggest you jump off a bridge, and you do so despite being aware of the risks involved. Well, this clearly is indicative of a dysfunction in impulse regulation. Right, so a normal person who's functioning appropriately would have the impulse to jump, but would regulate that impulse and not jump. Right, so there's something wrong with some part of the way you're thinking, feeling, or behaving. It's not the right way. And who determines the right way? probably a clinician. Okay, but it's so there's a dysfunction, and it's associated with distress, disability, excuse me, or risk of suffering. Okay. So if you have, if you meet the other criteria for disorder, let's say you hear voices, but it doesn't bother you, it doesn't really get in the way of anything you want to do, and you're not in risk of getting hurt, then you don't have a disorder. Even if you have a symptom, most people would say, oh wow, yeah, that sounds like you have a disorder. If it's not causing problems and doesn't bother you, not a disorder. But for each of these, hopefully you'll kind of stop and think, well, what do they mean by that? So associated with distress, how much distress does it need to be to meet criteria for this? Well, significant distress. What the DSM says. Well, what's significant distress? Well, probably a clinician decides that as well. But so with our teenager syndrome, maybe you got unfriended on Facebook and locked yourself in your room for supper. Is that clinically significant distress? Is that enough to make this a disorder? Maybe. And even disability, that seems straightforward, but again, disability unable to do what? That assumes there are certain things that people should do or should be able to do, right? So again, with this teenager syndrome, due to a lack of foresight, the teenagers are unable to manage a small company. Right? That's a disability. They should be able to do that, I would think. But they can't because they have the teenager syndrome. So what should people be able to do? And generally we think of this being, well, you should be able to function at an average level in school, work, and relationships. But again, not everybody can be average, but we assume that everybody can. Okay, so distress, disability, or risk of suffering. Well, how much suffering? What type of suffering? For our teenager syndrome, because of their desire for romantic attachments paired with their impulsivity, they may end up trying to engage another teenager in a romantic rendezvous, asking somebody on a date, which puts them at risk for rejection and emotional suffering. So again, this disorder of being a teenager is associated with a risk of suffering. Clearly these people need help. So hopefully these things are getting you to think about how this isn't going to be straightforward this semester, right? There are some very important and difficult questions about how to define abnormal behavior and how to define psychological disorders. Now this next one is another important piece. All this other stuff, this dysfunction and this syndrome, all these problems you're having, are not an expectable and culturally sanctioned reaction to an event. So if someone you love very much dies, and you feel depressed, and you cry, and you don't eat, and you have a hard time concentrating, all symptoms of major depressive disorder, we don't diagnose you with major depressive disorder because it's an expectable reaction to an event. And for us in the United States, it's a culturally sanctioned event for the most part, and there are some exceptions to that. In other cultures, that may not be culturally sanctioned, and there may be some cultures where you can grieve for a long time, for years, and that's culturally sanctioned, and it's fine. In America, it's not. You got about 6 months to be grieving, and after that, we say, okay, it's no longer grief. Now it probably is depression, right? Because we have these kind of unwritten cultural rules about how long you can grieve, how upset you can be. But again, so for some things, people say, okay, well, that's expectable. If you get mugged, it's expectable to be shook up, right? To be nervous and agitated for a while. If those symptoms persist, then we think, okay, well, maybe this is now a disorder, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder, maybe. Excuse me. So and then this last one is a little screwy. And conflicts with society don't count as psychological disorders, unless of course they do. And this is in here. The first part, that conflicts with society don't constitute disorders because of past abuses of psychiatry, in terms of imprisoning people, political dissidents. You think that women should have the right to vote? Well, you're clearly mentally ill and need to be locked up and protected from yourself, because only a crazy person would think that. Right? So people who disagreed with some prevailing view were often labeled with a disorder, and that way they could be confined without due process, unfortunately. So that's the reason that part is in here, to kind of keep that from happening anymore as much as possible. But then the unless it is part is, well, yeah, but sometimes you can be kind of a political dissident and still have a disorder, and that can be part of your disorder. So if you ever watch that whale wars, right? Those people that go out on the little boats and they chase the big boats of the whalers, and they shoot them with water cannons, and the whalers shoot back with like guns and stuff. Very dangerous thing. And you might think, wow, that seems to pose risk of suffering. That there might be some sort of psychological disorder associated with that, wanting to do that. But this criteria would say, no, it's not, unless it is. And the one example of where unless it is may be true is, well, let's say someone had a delusion that they were a whale. Right? So I believe I'm a whale, and therefore I must go protect my kin from these harpoonists. In that case, the behavior is part of the delusion, and it is a disorder. But so just because you're fighting whalers doesn't mean you have a disorder, but you still might have a disorder. Hopefully that's not too confusing. Okay, so we've talked about abnormal behavior. We've talked about psychological disorders, one after the other. So now let's look at them at the kind of the same time. How are they the same? How are they different? Well, in a nutshell, most disorders involve abnormal behavior, but not all abnormal behavior constitutes a disorder. Right? And to some degree, it's a matter of think about it being on a spectrum, where as a behavior becomes more abnormal, deviates more from a norm, more likely to be a disorder. So how deviant it is, how atypical it is, that's one consideration. But then the other major considerations are the degree to which it causes distress and the degree to which it causes impairment. And so deviation from a norm, distress, and impairment. When those things are present, it's much more likely to constitute something we refer to as a psychological disorder. Which again, a disorder isn't a thing, it's just a label we apply to some collection of behavior as we're trying to understand it and usually treat it. Now, thinking back to what we talked about originally about the definition of abnormal behavior, we talked about it's about the violation of expectations. And whose expectations? Well, for a psychological disorder, it's clinicians' expectations that you're violating. They're the ones that decide if your behavior is atypical, is not in keeping with expectations. In terms of the negative evaluation, some disorders have kind of a more negative connotation to them than others. And we'll see that over the course of the semester. I won't kind of talk too much about it now, but there is some stigma attached to having a disorder, but some disorders are more stigmatizing than others. And then lastly, in terms of the norms, what's normal in terms of the symptoms in psychological disorders? Who determines that? Well, really two branches. One would be the clinicians, there's clinical opinion, and then empirical researchers. Right. So there are some data on how anxious people are and how often people cry, and that influences to some degree diagnostic criteria. But to a pretty substantial degree as well, clinical opinion weighs in there too, in terms of determining how sad is it okay to be sad. It's not simply a matter of looking at the data. rather clinicians look at the data, and they also use their own expertise and experience to decide what normal is. A couple of the terms that you'll see over the course of the semester I wanted to touch on now. One will be psychopathology, which is the study of psychological disorders. It also sometimes used just as a broad term to refer to the presence of aspects of disorders. Like somebody exhibits, high levels of psychopathology, they're exhibiting lots of symptoms of some disorders. Other terms you may hear or read: mental disorder, sometimes used interchangeably with psychological disorder, and really the same thing, just a different way of saying it, putting the emphasis on the mental aspects as opposed to the behavioral aspects. And this has to do with kind of philosophical differences in the field that you don't need to worry about right now. Another term, mental illness, which some say, oh, well, yeah, mental illness, psychological disorder, same thing. Yes and no. They're used to refer to the same thing, but they reflect very different perspectives. When you use the term mental illness, that implies this kind of medical model that this collection of behaviors is an illness, right, and follows this kind of disease model, right, which suggests that it could be contagious, but it also suggests that it can be cured, right, and that there's something wrong, or something pathological about this person that needs to be fixed. Okay. Another term that we'll talk even more about later would be insanity, which is not a clinical term. That's a legal term. Clinicians don't use the term insanity or insane. That's for lawyers and judges. And the last term I just want to touch on would be etiology, just because I'll talk about it a lot. And etiology has to do with the study of origins. So I'm talking about the etiology of a client's depression. Why are they depressed? Where did it come from? What's the cause of it? Okay. And then some more terms related to who experiences abnormal behavior. Epidemiology. And one reason I have this in here is just to make sure you understand it's not the same thing as etiology. So etiology is the study of origins. Epidemiology is the study of the occurrence, course, and transmission of diseases. Right? Originally epidemics, but now really all diseases and disorders. If you're studying how many people have them, geographically how they're distributed, that's epidemiology. Right? One thing that epidemiologists look at would be incidence and prevalence. Incidence, that's the number of new cases in a given time period. So when you talk about the incidence, you have to have some context. So the 1-year incidence, the 2-year incidence, whatever. So the 1-year incidence of OCD, what's how many people were diagnosed with OCD in the past year, right? Versus prevalence, which is the total number of cases at some point in time, right? So the prevalence of OCD today is how many people meet criteria for obsessive compulsive disorder today. Another term you'll see related to this would be comorbidity, and this is the presence of 2 or more disorders or diseases at the same time. So if you have anxiety and comorbid depression, it means you have anxiety and depression. In terms of who experiences abnormal behavior, really a large study done years ago now, the epidemiologic catchment area study, found that 32% of the population said at one point in their lives they had met criteria for a psychological disorder. This was using a certain set of criteria. It was slightly less if there was dysfunction or disability involved, where they missed work, kind of thing, 20%. But still a pretty good chunk of the population meeting criteria for some disorder. So a lot of people meet criteria at some point in their lives for something in the DSM. And it's what, 32%? But I would predict that 99% of you will diagnose yourselves or someone you know with a disorder this summer. And that's not because I think you all have disorders or people you know have disorders. It's because I think these disorders that we're studying aren't these kind of rare maladies that only affect some people. These disorders are just aspects of the human condition that some people struggle with more than others. So it's really not surprising that you'll see yourself or someone you love reflected in the descriptions. Doesn't mean they have the disorder, doesn't mean they meet criteria, but the experiences are part of the human experience, not just disordered experience. It's not typically not qualitatively different. It's more often quantitatively different, right? With major depressive disorder, a lot of people have times when they feel sad. They have problems concentrating. They have times when they're not hungry. If you have all of that at once for a long enough time, you might meet criteria for major depressive disorder. But again, that's quantitative difference, not qualitative. Over the course of the semester, we'll also see that there are gender differences in the diagnostic rates of disorders. And some of that may be because men and women express pathology at different levels. And some of it is differences in terms of, even if they might be the same in terms of expression, one might be diagnosed more than the other due to kind of societal pressures to suppress or express certain symptoms. We'll also address cultural differences in terms of the diagnostic rates of disorders. And then we'll also touch on disease burden, which this is a term that talks about the impact of a disorder or disease beyond just that you have it, right? So having major depressive disorder, there's a measurable disease burden. It's usually at a kind of a population level. What's the financial impact? What's the impact on morbidity, mortality, on their health, on how likely they are to die, on their quality of life, things like that. Okay, so that's about it for now.